Hey guitar fam and friends, welcome to this episode of the Improv Loop, where I'm going to say something a little controversial, maybe, but it probably shouldn't be. I'm going to try to keep you from wasting years of your practice life on something that's not very effective for learning how to improvise. As a matter of fact, this is the number one thing I would say to not do if you want to learn how to improvise on the guitar. I know because I've made the mistake, and I just want to share this with you. Okay, let's just get right to it. If you're trying to learn how to improvise on the guitar, don't try to learn huge, giant scale shapes like this. And expect to be able to improvise with them over chord changes, specifically over chord changes. The reason I say that is because it's just too much information, especially when you're first starting out. If you learn a scale shape, and that's what we kind of all do as guitar players, we learn a scale shape, whether it's a pentatonic or a major scale shape or a minor scale shape or whatever it is. And we learn it, get it down, and then we try to make music with it, and it sounds like that because that's what we practice, right? And it's too much information. You're like, okay, well, unless you have like supersonic ears where you can play by ear and resolve things as chords go by really quickly, which is very few guitar players. If you're anything like me, regular Joe guitar, then it's just too much information. So what we're going to do throughout this entire series of videos that we're doing here is just like almost attack things from the opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to strip things, pull everything away to just one note, then we're going to add two notes, then we're going to add three notes, and we're going to be using a lot of different chord shapes up and down the neck, little triad shapes and things like that, just so you have kind of a glimpse into the future. And I'm not saying to not practice scale shapes. I think they're great for a couple things. I think they're great for getting facility on the guitar and working on technique. I also think they're great for getting an overview of a certain key. Like I just played that G major scale. And because I sat there and drilled that scale for so long, I know the note names in the key of G, and I could see a big picture of the key of G when I'm trying to improvise, but it doesn't always help me when I'm playing over chord changes. As a matter of fact, I think it makes it more difficult. So what we're gonna do again is just strip away things, and that's what the next lessons are gonna be about over, I don't know. It's really, this whole series has to do with that. Instead of starting with big scales, start with one note and then start with little chord shapes. And as chords change, we'll get a little bit more complex and a little bit more complex, but it's nothing that you can't do. You can do it. I thought for the longest time that working on this stuff was just too difficult and that I couldn't do it, but turns out I was wrong. Turns out it just takes some consistent work. It is hard work, but it does take consistent work and taking it in really little bite-sized pieces. So having said that, I'm going to contradict myself for you right now. If you want to learn a major scale shape just to get some facility and some technique down, I would suggest learning one of two shapes depending on what style of music you're into. The first one is just this G major scale shape right here. And it's great just for getting your hands warm and getting that technique down with your right hand and with your left hand, and just for knowing the notes in the key of G. But like what I don't recommend you do is take any of the jam tracks we do and just run up and down the scale, because it sounds like you're running up and down the scale. It's much better to, first of all, learn where the G notes are. Once you know where the root notes are, you can start to throw in the other important notes of the chord tones, like the third and the fifth. In this case, we'll be playing G's, B's, and D's. And don't worry if you don't understand what we're talking about here. We'll get to it little bit by little bit, one step at a time. But when you do that and kind of dissect things into their smallest bits, like root notes, and then maybe the roots and thirds, then the fifth, all of a sudden you're playing licks that sound more like music or a guitar solo rather than just a scale. So I'll play it a little bit slower, this major scale shape. And I'm not going to cover anything, but just mess around with the scale for now. That's really all this lesson is about, is like, don't rely on this to improvise, but have it knowing in the background somewhere and develop a little technique with it. The other version of this is just a 3-note per string major scale shape. And this is really the only time we're going to cover scales per se throughout this series, but the 3-note per string version of this G major scale will be like this. And when you're playing scale shapes like this, it's important to be able to visualize them on the guitar as you play them, that way you know exactly where your fingers are going. And then, you know, we'll pull them apart to play things more like that in the future. So the main takeaway from this lesson is you can ignore everything else, the shapes and all that stuff. The main takeaway is don't rely on big giant scale shapes to play leads over chord changes that are whizzing by, because it's just too much information. You can learn these 2 scale shapes here. It's never a bad thing. Another thing that's good to do as you're learning them is to write the scale out. So the G major scale, write it out so you can memorize the numbers and the scale degrees as you go, like D is the 5, B is the 3, A is the 2, G is the 1, all those things. Okay, if you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments below. If you disagree with me about scales not being a great tool to improvise over chord changes, let me know about that too. If you haven't subscribed and hit the notifications bell if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and do that. That way you don't miss any of the episodes that are coming up. And don't forget, if you need a private lesson with me, the first one is complimentary for every Guitar Fan member. So go to guitarfan.com, create a complimentary account, and schedule that first lesson. That's it.